Good morning. Javier Becerra, Chairman of the Democratic Caucus here in the House of Representatives, joined by my colleague and Vice Chairman of the caucus, Joe Crowley. We're joined today by our leader, Nancy Pelosi, and we are, of course, joined by our Assistant Democratic Leader as well, Jim Clyburn. Most of today's caucus dealt with a task and a job that Assistant Leader Clyburn has been working on with a number of members as a result of an initiative that was begun by our leader to reach out to America, to make sure that when it comes to understanding what Congress does, everyone in America gets it. Because the reality is what we do here in America, here in Congress, I mean, really does affect everyone in our country. And so we want to make sure that Americans are engaged. And we want to try to reach out to them more than just as constituents, but as people who make a difference in the lives of their fellow Americans. And so most of our caucus today focused on the good work done by Mr. Clyburn and members of his task force. We do want to also mention that it was referenced that we're hoping that soon the Senate will finally vote on Loretta Lynch's nomination to be the Attorney General. She's waited over 164 days, longer than any Attorney General nominee has had to wait in more than 30 years. It's time, and so we're hoping that that will move forward. And we also want to make sure that we work with our members on the legislation that's on the floor this week. We have a bill that would damage the protections that we have for consumers in America today. The ability of the watchdog agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, in making sure that all Americans' privacy, all of their rights as consumers are protected by the United States government. And unfortunately, the legislation on the floor today would actually undermine the ability of that watchdog agency to do its work on behalf of all Americans. We're very concerned about that. And we had presentations by our ranking members on intelligence, Mr. Schiff, and on Homeland Security, Mr. Thompson, on the pending cybersecurity legislation that will be on the floor, something critically needed. Also, because of all the concerns about privacy, something very interesting and must be tackled by this Congress very soon. But again, the focus today was on the presentation by Mr. Clyburn and his team to make sure that we're reaching out to all Americans. And for that, I'd like to yield at this stage to our leader to discuss that effort begun by Mr. Clyburn. Madam Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you and the Vice Chair, Mr. Crowley, for once again, another very productive caucus meeting with the full agenda, the highlight of which was Mr. Clyburn's presentation with Congresswoman Grace Meng, Congresswoman Hakeem Jeffries, and Congressman Cedric Richmond, three young new faces out there to engage and reach out to the public. We're observing the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Many of us were in Selma. Crossing that bridge was a bridge to the ballot. As our chairman, Mr. Becerra, said, very important things are happening here that affect people. Public opinion affects us. Abraham Lincoln said public sentiment is everything. And we want to make sure that Democrats, Republicans, everyone who was here understands the public view of how they are affected by what we do here. And I cannot be more pleased. I'm thrilled and proud of how Mr. Clyburn has led this initiative, taking advantage of the 50th anniversary, recognizing other great things happened 50 years ago, which he will go into, how they are at risk now, how important they are to the public, how important the public's weighing in on it is. And I'm not just talking about in elections, I'm talking about as we go forward. So thank you, Mr. Clyburn, for your great leadership. You were part of the Civil Rights Movement. You were part of the Voting Rights Act then, as a very young person, of course, and now you are here to protect all of that and, more importantly, take us into the future in a larger way. Inspired by what happened 50 years ago, concerned about the risk to it right now, but understanding what needs to be done in the future. Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader, and thank you so much for entrusting this responsibility to me. I think that all of us, after last November elections, sort of reflected upon what did or did not happen and trying to find out why the public is not more engaged in the electoral process. At the first meeting of this task force that the leader has instructed me to chair, a question, Lucille Roybal Allard, who is a member of this task force, said that she kept hearing a question being asked everywhere she went. Now, she spoke the Spanish for it, which I'm a little bit rusty on, but the translation was, what for? People kept asking, what for? And so we decided that this group needed to try and answer the question for the voting public, what for? And we took a look at the fact that this year we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of what a lot of people focus on as just Selma, the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which led to a lot of other things, not just voting rights. In fact, a month after that march, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed, April 11th, 1965. And that started just a plethora of over 30 laws that were passed in 1965, answering questions and responding to what took place on March 7th across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So we are asking our caucus to take a look at all of those pieces of legislation, Head Start, Medicare and Medicaid, the creation of HUD, the first immigration law that outlawed quotas, Higher Education Act. All of these things took place, among many others, in 1965, and so we are highlighting those things this year in order to help answer the question, what for? And to chair the subcommittee or the committee of the task force on planning and mechanics is Grace Ming of New York. And I want to yield the mic to her now to share with you some of what her committee has been doing to help answer this question. Ms. Ming.
Thank you, Chairman Clyburn, and thank you, Leader Pelosi, for your vision and giving us the tools to carry these important messages across America. As Mr. Clyburn mentioned, this is the 50th anniversary of so many pieces of landmark legislation that changed the lives of so many Americans and the course of American policy. And we want to make sure we heard a lot in the last election from all over about the disconnect between what Congress does and how people feel the impact in their daily lives. And so this task force is something that we'll be working on throughout the country to ensure that the American people, particularly people from traditionally underserved and underrepresented communities, our young people at the high school and the college level, many of whom hopefully will be participating civically for the first time. And we want them to understand what Congress can do for America and what Congress should be doing. 1965 was an amazing year on all fronts, whether we're talking about working families, seniors, communities of color, immigrant families, and younger Americans. And we want to highlight what needs to be done and what has been done and what we need to do to go forward. So thank you for this opportunity.
We've also been joined as well by the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the esteemed member from New Mexico, Ben Ray Lujan, and if he would like to say a couple words as well, let me yield to him as well.
Thank you, Chairman Becerra, and to all of our colleagues who are with us today, Leader Pelosi and Grace for the work you're doing, Jim Clyburn for leading this effort. It's critically important. as we're reaching out to the American people and reminding us of the importance of participating, the importance of getting involved, of the importance of making sure that our voices are heard. And that's right through the ballot box as well. 50 years ago, we were together to remember a commemoration of Selma. And to be here again today in the presence of Mr. Clyburn and Mr. Lewis, with the words of the President, I think challenging the American people to vote is why we're here and why this is so important. And I think as we talk about elections, the one thing that I like to point out today as well is the difference that we're seeing between Democrats and Republicans, I think can be pointed out with a quote from one of the co-founders of the Heritage Foundation, Paul Weyrich, who said, and I quote, "I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections goes up as the voting populace goes down." Close quote. That's a difference here. When more people get involved, America is better and stronger. Everyday Americans, we need to make sure that we're showing up and that we're letting our voices be heard. Because we know that when everybody votes and more people vote, America does better. And that usually translates to Democrats doing better as well. So we want more people voting, more people getting involved, and we want to push back against this notion from Mr. Paul Weyrich that fewer people should vote. We need more people involved, and that's what Mr. Clyburn is going to be doing and making sure that he's engaging the entire country with.
So we'll take any questions, but obviously you can see our main focus is trying to make sure that we reach out to the American people and let them know that we want them to participate. Simply because they don't have a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate does not mean that we don't want them to be engaged. We want to hear what they have to say. We are the representatives. And what Mr. Clyburn, Ms. Meng, and the rest of the task force members are doing is making sure that we make it clear that on the Democratic side here in the House, we want to hear from people, and we want to make sure we're reflecting their voices. With that, we'll take any questions. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. I'm sorry. No. Mr. Crowley's going to close us off. I apologize. Usually, Mr. Crowley, the vice chairman, goes right after I do. Mr. Crowley.
To close over this, but no problem. I think you said it well. I just would just say, as Jim Clyburn sentineled this issue 50 years ago and continues to do so today, it's a reminder, I think, to all of us in listening to the presentation that was made before our caucus. I don't think that presentation should be kept in our caucus. We need to get this out, and I know you intend to in certain ways, but the presentation itself was one of the best presentations I've ever seen in my 17 years here in the Democratic caucus. And it's also a reminder to us, as though Jim was a civil rights leader at a pinnacle point in our nation's history, a reminder to all of us that we're all part of the civil rights movement because it continues today. I think that is a message that all Americans need to hear, especially young people who do feel disenchanted with the process and the system, that they need to understand that they are part of this system, whether they like it or not. If they want to like it more, they need to participate more. And I think that is also the overwhelming message from today's task force briefing. I want to thank not only Jim, but as was mentioned, two people who touch upon my home county of Queens County, Grace Meng, who's entirely within Queens County, Hakeem Jeffries, who's fortunate enough to have a portion of the greatest borough of New York City, Queens County, and Cedric Richmond, who wished he came from Queens County. So with that, we thank you all.
New York always spills out. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Chad. Let's take some questions. And Chad, we can't answer that, but first I want to make sure that I respect the members who are here to talk about this outreach, and so we'll take that question. But let me first make sure that we answer any questions there might be with regard to the work that's being done by the members on this task force. Okay, if not, then on the question of trade, and I'll ask my colleagues to join in giving any a response as well. Look, I think our leader has said it best. This is more a matter of making sure we have the best agreement possible to move forward on trade deals and the best mechanism for Congress, which has the constitutional authority to move on trade deals, to do its work for the American people. Bottom line, I think most of us here believe that any deal that's going to create jobs in America is going to be a good deal. Any deal that helps new businesses grow, great. Any deal that helps establish businesses in America have better opportunities for commerce, especially abroad, excellent. We want that as well. If you can pass that threshold test, then we should seriously consider voting for these trade deals or the mechanism, the TPA, the Trade Promotion Authority measure that would give us an opportunity to vote on such measures that help us boost the economy and American jobs. Having said that, the agreement has to contain the elements that make that possible. And many of us have been around long enough to know how these trade deals work and what works best and what doesn't work at all. And we don't need to open up our markets to just be taken advantage of. We don't need to sign deals that would simply scare jobs away from America to other places of the world. What we need is to let people know that Americans make the best products in the world and that we can sell them if we have a fair trade regime. We hope that what we have before us on the House floor or the Senate floor will be a bill that reflects both the mechanism, the TPA, the Trade Promotion Authority measure, that will let us vote on good trade deals, and that we have future trade deals, whether it's the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, or any other deal that actually helps create jobs, but helps us make sure that it's a fair deal that lets us trade. And so right now I think a lot of us in the House are hoping to see a bill that won't make the mistakes of the past, that will take the best elements of the past and give us something that we can vote on. So I haven't said a whole lot other than to say it's got to be a good deal. Otherwise, like anything else, you'll vote yes or no. Let me ask any other members if they wish to comment.
Well, I'll say this. Having voted for some and voted against others, I think that all of us want to create jobs, but we also want to grow jobs. There's a big difference in just creating a job and growing a job. NAFTA created a lot of jobs, but it eliminated a lot of jobs. And so what we want to do is make sure that this is a deal that will create jobs and help grow jobs.
I have had, Congressman Joe Crowley, I haven't heard any indication that anything will be whipped on this particular bill. As of yet, there's been no indication that I've heard from Mr. Hoyer's office or from the leader's office that this bill will be whipped.
Markup tomorrow on Ways and Means, and the two of you are on Ways and Means. Are you going to support the TPA?
You first.
If it's the TPA that I saw introduced, I would not be supporting that TPA. If it's a TPA that actually helps Americans grow jobs, as Mr. Clyburn said, if it's a TPA that has rules that are credible for us and for our trading partners to follow, and probably the most important thing, if we have a mechanism to make sure that countries and companies aren't cheating against American companies and American workers, then yeah, I can vote for that. But what I'm finding in trade deals is that we create more commerce, but we can't stop the cheating. The biggest issue we have is the cheating. Countries dumping their steel in America, which makes it tough for our steel industry to compete. Countries that allow their currency to be manipulated so that it looks like it's less valuable, which makes their products that they produce look less valuable. So when they sell them abroad, they look cheaper than what they are, which causes American products to not be uncompetitive. Products that are manufactured by American workers, which means American companies won't survive and American workers' jobs will be shipped abroad. They'll be outsourced to other countries. It's pretty clear what we have to do. When you do any kind of trade, I don't care what you're bartering, whether it's your car or your furniture, you want to make sure you get a fair deal. And that's all we're asking for is let's get a fair deal. We know what we need to have a fair deal. We know what doesn't make for a fair deal. So I think most of us know the elements of what works and what doesn't. And we'll see if when we have a chance to vote, whether in committee or on the floor, we have a deal that really can work for the interest of American workers to create more jobs and American businesses so we can have a more robust business.
I just want to answer this question. You can go back to the chairman. Let me first of all thank the President and the administration, as well as Senator Wyden, for their work in terms of attempting to improve and in some ways successful in improving what was the then Camp Bacchus language. I was opposed to Camp Bacchus. I opposed TPA during the Bush administration, and I had indicated that I would not support this legislation if it was not discernibly different from the Camp draft. And my intention tomorrow is to vote against this proposal.
Do you believe that the deal that Senator Wyden negotiated can get support of enough Democrats in the House, or is it going to have to change?
You know, that's really a question for the Speaker and the majority to try to put forward a bill, because that bill that was introduced did not include the participation of most House Democrats, and so therefore is a bill that, as Mr. Crowley said, we find elements that are good, but we had indicated over the last several months things that would have to be in a bill to make it really work. And if it's not going to help create jobs in America, and if it's going to cause American jobs to be outsourced outside of America, it's tough to want to be for that kind of a bill. And we're hoping that we have a bill that we can vote for that actually helps make sure trade works for America as much as it works for anyone else.
Has there been any communications with the Speaker about how many votes he has and how many votes he would like to get from the other side to get this through?
I'm not aware of any official work that's being done, coordinated between the two sides of the aisle on the House side to try to get the votes. I know there have been many, many conversations. I know the White House and the President are working very hard to try to see if they can help Congress come up with a bill that can be supported, because trade is a very important issue, and the President's made that very, very clear. And many of us have had conversation with the President and members of his administration trying to make sure we can work towards getting a trade bill that really will work for everyone in America.
But I guess that's what I'm getting at here, is that, why would the President, you guys are at loggerheads against what he has put forward here, what the Democrats say, and at the end of the day, though, is it going to be embarrassing to the President, even if you disagree with him on this position, if a bunch of Democrats come out and vote no on it?
No, Chad, you're making an assumption there that I don't think is correct. It doesn't usually happen that whatever the President would suggest to Congress becomes the actual text of a bill that the Republican majority in the House of Representatives, or even now in the Senate, puts forward for a vote. I can attest to that by talking to you about the 56 times that we have voted in the House floor to repeal or dismantle the health security law that now has helped some 20 million Americans have health insurance they can afford. The President has said he's willing to improve on that law, but that doesn't mean that we've seen in the House or the Senate bills presented that reflect the President's intentions to improve. And so I think the President has made it very clear that he wants to move forward on trade and how he has outlined it. And I think what we're hoping for is something that we also see is as close as we can get to a good bill that not only helps create jobs in America, but it makes sure that we keep jobs in America as well.
There's an awful lot of, I think, good measures being taken that have traditionally been in Trade Promotion Authority discussions in the past, including TAA. I think, as the chairman has said, what we're looking for is trade agreements that promote growth in the United States. I think we're also dealing with perception as well. Whether or not it's real or not, perception is reality for many people. And I don't think the American people, unfortunately, have yet been to be convinced that these trade agreements have been working for them. Having said that, I have supported, even since the passage of the initial TPA under the Bush administration, that did not stop me from looking at each of the agreements and determining whether or not it's in the best interest of our country to support or not support those agreements. And so I will continue to make that effort on each agreement that comes before me and make a determination based on the merits of the agreement.
I agree with the Vice Chairman on that, and we thank you very much.